नमस्कार, आदाब, सत श्री अकाल दोस्तों। स्वागत है आपका एक बार फिर से हमारे YouTube चैनल ब्रास फ्यूजन्स पर, जहां हम आपके लिए एक बार फिर से लेकर आए हैं एक नया लेसन।
And the courts will apply their own law, presuming that it is similar to that of foreign law. We looked at different provisions of Indian Evidence Act to further expand on that idea. Lastly, we reflected on the exclusion of foreign law. We said that when everything is said and done, there still could be a possibility where foreign law is excluded. Now, in that regard, we specifically referred to public policy, revenue laws, penal laws, and other public laws, and we had a small discussion on it yesterday. Now, this is how the second stage of a private international law dispute is placed. However, when it comes to the third stage of private international law dispute, that is fine, applicable law is identified and it is applied. Now, after the application of the law, what might happen is that that judgment which the court has pronounced is to be enforced in some other jurisdiction, a foreign country. How can we do that? How is it possible for us to apply it in relation to a foreign country? Now, that is the problem. Now, that's the third stage. There is a separate module for third stage. That is the second last module of your syllabus, which talks about this third stage. Now, we'll have to wait till we come to that particular module and see it in more detail. There are quite a few cases, and a maximum number of cases are listed in that module. So we'll wait and see when that module comes as to how enforcement of foreign judgments as an issue is placed. At this point of time, all we need to know is that there is a third stage which tries to take care of the issue of recognition and enforcement of foreign judgments when a judgment has been pronounced following the steps which we have already covered. And in between, we will be reflecting on all these stages one by one. So every case will reflect on the stages which we have already covered. Although your syllabus does not really necessitate us that we should at all. There might be a possibility like that. So to put it in more technical sense, I would say that every private international law dispute would involve a situation where foreign element is placed. That is something which you all must know. But identification of foreign law might become controversial or might become contentious if we don't have clarity over the status of the person concerned. Now, let me simplify this point for you. Generally, as a matter of policy, it is universally recognized. And this word universally recognized is something which I'm not going to invoke regularly, and especially in relation to private international law. That is not the case. That the issues or the questions which affect, say, the private status of a human being should be governed constantly by one body of law. Now, we have seen in the past as to why that is the case. The entire basis of private international law is this. The entire basis of private international law is don't do injustice to the party. If the party entered into, or if two people got married in one country, and the law of that particular country applied to them when they got married, don't really change the overall status. Don't really try to innovate, because then what we'll be affecting is the personal status of those individuals who got married. So rather, try to have a uniform application in terms of personal affairs of human beings are concerned. That's a universally recognized principle. But the moment we say that personal affairs or personal affair of human beings have to be governed by one and the same law, say irrespective of where that person might go in future. Now, how is it possible? How can we really maintain this consistency of application of law? Maybe is it possible in the first place? Now, it is possible only when we are able to identify a constant feature. When I say constant feature, what I mean is that only when we are able to identify something which is going to be constant for all the times for that particular person, or something which is reflective of a status which the person enjoyed when the person got into, say, a particular legal relationship, say getting married or entering into contract, or for that matter any other thing. So it is such status that we are worried about. If we are able to identify the status of the person, then based on the status of the person, we can argue that, you know what, let's apply the law which is applicable to this, let's apply the law of domicile of this particular person. Let's apply the law of a country of which this person is national of. Maybe if that kind of consistency can be identified, or if that kind of status rather can be identified, then there is some likelihood of consistency. This is the point which I want to emphasize at this point of time. That the status of a person in private international law becomes very, very important in order to solve private international law disputes, because on the basis of the legal status of the person, the applicable law is often identified. I hope this point is clear. This point is an important point which you all must understand. That private international law rules generally identify the applicable law on the basis of status which a person might enjoy. To give an example, private international law rules might say that in matrimonial matters, the law which would apply is the law of domicile. So the next thing for us would be to go to the law of domicile of that particular person. But in order to do that, the biggest problem is to identify the domicile of the person. Fine, we might say that law of domicile would apply in this case. But what is the domicile of the person? And more fundamentally, for the students of private international law like us, what is domicile? We need to understand what is domicile in the first place before we go to the second question, how domicile is identified. How domicile might play a very central role in deciding private international law disputes. All these questions are important, but we are mostly concerned about the first question here. And the first question being, what is domicile? And unless we understand what is domicile, how can one domicile be attributed to another person? Then only we can say that law of domicile of this person should apply in case at hand. It is this question which I'm referring to. There's one point which I wanted to make, and I wanted to make this point mainly because of my experience. I mean, I was checking some answer scripts. Your end term answer scripts last year. And there was a general confusion which I found, which troubled me a bit, that many students seem to presume that a person can enjoy just one legal status. When I say one legal status, let me explain this point. So a person can only have a domicile, or a person can only have a nationality, or a person can only be habitual resident. And a person cannot hold all these three statuses at the same time, or a person cannot hold two statuses at the same time. So this is often a mistake which I have seen in answer scripts and even otherwise. Let me clarify right at the outset that a person can hold more than one status or all the 3 to 4 statuses at the same time. A person can have a citizenship. A person will necessarily have a domicile. There is not a single person without domicile. Every person has a domicile in legal sense, and we are going to understand how the domicile of each and every person is decided. The moment we are born, we get a domicile in legal sense. A person can also maintain habitual residence at a particular place. So a person can enjoy different legal statuses at the same time. And private international law rules categorize that in relation to say matrimonial matters, it is generally law of domicile which would decide the dispute at hand. right? So private international law rules might categorize it on the basis of either subject matter or the status of the individual. It is this point which I wanted to clarify right at the outset. I hope that is clear. All right. Now, when it comes to a definition of domicile, is a question. Okay, it is clear, fine. So as I said, and just to close that particular discussion, that private international rules can be classified on the basis of different status which a person enjoys or on the basis of subject matter which is at hand. It is in this regard that domicile becomes a very interesting concept. In this module, we are also going to make a distinction between domicile, nationality, and habitual residence. So we are going to come to all these points. Now let me start our discussion on domicile. When we say domicile, what is it that we mean? Can there be one universal definition of domicile? The answer to this question is no. There cannot be, or there is no one universal definition of domicile. The concept of domicile is not uniform throughout the world, to put it in more simpler terms. So for example, for a civil lawyer, domicile only means habitual residence. So a civil lawyer would identify domicile in terms of habitual residence. For common law system, domicile is almost considered as equivalent to a person's permanent home. Now, before you get confused further, when we say in common law system, domicile is considered as equivalent of a person's home, it does not really reveal the main picture. Equivalent to a person's permanent home. Even this does not reveal the complete picture. What could be permanent home? I mean, mere owning the house, can it be considered as permanent home? Or merely having an intention to go and live in a particular country can be considered as permanent home. Now, these are some of the questions which are important to understand the issue of domicile. So the phrase which I just identified, that in common law system domicile is generally regarded as equivalent of a person's permanent home, should not be considered as a definition of domicile. It is difficult to define domicile in this particular sense. Therefore, what we often do is that instead of merely defining domicile, we go to the extent of exemplifying it. We explain it. We illustrate the idea of domicile. Such an idea that, okay, it is merely equivalent to a person's permanent home would be too simplistic way of explaining domicile. Now, this brings me to the next idea, and that is the idea of explaining domicile. When it comes to domicile, there are two different classes of domicile. One is known as domicile of origin, and the second one is known as domicile of choice. Now, what do I mean by domicile of origin and domicile of choice? We are going to spend some time on these two factors one by one. When we say domicile of origin, what we basically mean is that every person is extended a domicile by operation of law at the time of birth. So the moment a person is born, domicile of origin is extended to that particular person by the operation of law. We don't have a choice there. Or the parents don't have a choice there. Say that, no, you know what, I want such and such domicile for my child, although I might maintain some other domicile. Now, before some of you get confused, how does that actually work when the person is born, by operation of law, certain domicile is placed? To give a small explanation to this account, that the domicile of the father is generally considered as the domicile of the child. So whatever domicile a father might hold would be considered as the domicile of the child. But what if the child is illegitimate child? In such a situation, it's the domicile of the mother which is extended to the child. Now, this is a very, very controversial issue, and we will discuss this issue in one of our lectures when we go to case laws and specific sections of Indian Succession Act. So we will go to this particular aspect of legitimacy, illegitimacy, and how problematic, how patriarchal this entire law relating to domicile is. But at least for now, let me just briefly explain domicile of origin and domicile of choice. So that is what the general position with regard to domicile of origin is. When it comes to domicile of choice, now every person has a domicile. But when it comes to domicile of choice, what we mean is that when a person attains majority, that person is at liberty to change his domicile. Or to put it in other words, to acquire a new domicile. And this is known as domicile of choice. That replacing the domicile of origin or substituting the domicile of origin with another domicile. Right? So these are the two classes of domicile which must be taken into consideration when you are studying the law relating to domicile. Now, this entire factor of domicile of origin and domicile of choice has only or just has one specific aspect, that it merely demonstrates, say, acquisition and loss of domicile. When I say acquisition, it means that acquiring a new domicile by operation of domicile of choice. And when I say loss, it means that the loss of domicile of origin. So if I was born in India, my father had an Indian domicile. When I was born in India, I also got Indian domicile. But what if after 5-10 years, I decide to get or adopt some other domicile? In such a situation, what will be lost is my domicile of origin, that is Indian domicile. But I can still but I will acquire something else. And what I will acquire is the domicile of choice, a new domicile. For example, Canada. Now, if I acquire the domicile of that country, fine, I say that this is the new domicile which I want to acquire. So the distinction merely relates to acquisition and loss of domicile, and not its effect. So the effect will not change. Effect is going to be the same. It's not that in domicile of choice you get something extra. No, domicile is just a legal status which will be used to determine that which law would apply in a particular situation, especially in relation to, say, matrimonial issues. That is all that matters. This is the point which I wanted to mention. So, to put it in other words, or to put it in more simple sense, and here I'm going to introduce the requirement of attaining a and there must be an intention. One is known as objective test. The first one is known as objective test. And the second one is known as subjective test. Now, when I say there must be an act, what kind of act am I talking about? What is this act that I'm worried about? The act which I'm worried about is to have a residence. So there must be a residence at the place where I want to acquire a domicile. But even having a residence will not do. Merely having a residence will not do. As I said, there are two requirements. There must be an act and there must be an intention. Meaning thereby that one needs to differentiate. There is an objective test and there is a subjective test. The act implies having a residence. And the second, the subjective test which I refer to, that is the intention, means the desire to live at that particular place permanently or indefinitely. So the intention is also very important. Merely act or merely living at a particular place, having a place of residence at a particular place will not give you domicile. You should live there. You should have a desire to live there at a particular place permanently or indefinitely. That yes, I'm going to live here for all the times to come. Only then the domicile could be established. Did you understand this point? No, yes. All right. All right. I hope you have understood. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. All right. Amisha, Donika, Sakshi, did you understand the point? Shubham? All right. Fine, let me move ahead then. If you're following the discussion. Now, what I'm going to do subsequently. Now, this is how the idea of domicile, the basic idea of domicile is to be understood. If you have understood this much, then the subsequent discussion is going to be easy. That whenever we talk about domicile, there are two different classes of domicile, that is domicile of origin and domicile of choice. Domicile of a particular domicile when that person is born. And this is generally the domicile of the father, but if the child is illegitimate, then it is the domicile of the mother. This extremely patriarchal legal understanding will come to its critique subsequently when we study the domicile of dependents in detail. We'll come to this particular aspect. The second class which we talked about is domicile of choice. That when the person attains majority, he or she has the liberty to change the domicile. But changing the domicile is not an easy task. A domicile must necessarily have, in terms of its change, two important aspects. And I'm going to further detail these aspects now. One is the objective test and the other is the subjective test. When we say objective test, what we are referring to is an act of having a residence or act of living at a particular place, to put it in more general sense. The act of living at a particular place, but merely living at a particular place does not give you domicile of that particular country. It should be accompanied by intention to live there, which is the subjective test. The intention to live there indefinitely or permanently. Merely going to a country to spend a vacation will not give you domicile or will not entitle you to change your domicile. The intention should be to live there permanently or indefinitely. That's the point which we are referring to. Now, when it comes to subsequent idea, that is general rules of domicile, what I'm going to do subsequently is to explain all these points one by one, which I've just identified. The first point which I want to mention is that it is a settled principle, and maybe I'm repeating myself here. It is a second principle that nobody shall be without a domicile. Every person will have a domicile. Now, in order to make this effective, the law assigns what is called a domicile of origin, or just a minute, my phone, I guess it is getting discharged. Yeah. So in order to make this effective, what law does is that law assigns a domicile of origin to each and every person at birth. We are identifying the general rules relating to domicile. Now, this domicile of origin shall prevail for all the times. For example, when I was born, I got a domicile. Now, this domicile has continued with me, has prevailed throughout, and it will continue throughout. I might die like having this domicile.
दोस्तों, अगर आपको आज का लेसन पसंद आया हो तो वीडियो को लाइक करें। इसी के साथ अगर आपने अभी तक हमारा चैनल सब्सक्राइब नहीं किया है तो सब्सक्राइब के बटन पर क्लिक करिए और बेल आइकन दबाना ना भूलें, ताकि आपको एजुकेशन से रिलेटेड नए नए अपडेट्स मिलते रहें। और अधिक जानकारी पाने के लिए आप हमारे फेसबुक और इंस्टाग्राम पेज से भी जुड़ सकते हैं, जिसका लिंक डिस्क्रिप्शन बॉक्स में दिया गया है। धन्यवाद।